Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Nelly Vasquez. I'm Business Development Manager for Turner, New York. I want to welcome all of you to our 13th roundtable session. So today we're going to be talking about something that's impacting us all, whether it's personally or professionally. We're going to talk about the global supply chain. So before I introduce our panel, I want to just quickly take you through our format. So we're going to do about a 25, 30-minute discussion followed by a moderated Q&A. During the discussion, feel free to submit questions at the bottom of your screen. You'll see a Q&A button. Just throw your question in there. I'll be monitoring it through the course of the discussion, and I promise I'll get through as many as I can. So without further ado, we can get to our guests. We have Drew Campbell, President of Eastern Millwork. We have Bob Muir, Vice President of Business Development from Cooper Power Systems. We have our own Mike Bruskin, Vice President, Director of Procurement. Unfortunately, Phil Malebranche from FedEx will likely be unable to join us. He had a last minute conflict, but there's a small chance he can hop on. So I'm going to keep my fingers crossed. So without further ado, let's get right into it. Let's start with a look back at the past year. Like we all kind of know what happened throughout the world, but I'm interested to hear how it's impacted your respective businesses and how it's fared. So Bob, we can start with you.
I think the initial impact was kind of a surprise. I think everybody, both personally and professionally, dealt with it. It was almost like a surreal thing. You didn't think it was going to actually happening, and it just continued and continued. And it was just something that obviously the world had never seen. So dealing with that, the initial shutdowns, we started to have issues with production. We had projects closing down. And of course, I think we also personally, we saw a lot of panic buying. People weren't sure what they needed. And then we also had a lot of projects that started to get closed down, and there was a rush at that time, probably the April timeframe, for projects to be classified as essential, so that they could actually keep going during the entire pandemic. Our company's obviously essential. We were always open, always had technicians out. It wasn't business as usual though, because we didn't know how to deal with technicians getting sick, protocols going into buildings. So it was certainly the first month or two, a lot of chaos and a lot of planning that you've never had worked out before.
What about you guys?
I think for us, very similar as a subcontractor. It's obviously kind of initially got stopped. I mean, we had a lot of jobs that just sort of faded away, so our volume dropped. And then it was just trying to figure out how do you continue on. I mean, determine who could work from home successfully. What operations we had to have people for here in our factory. And supporting people that needed to be here for the operations, and then how they work together. Getting that to coordinate, and then it was probably the initial struggle. We had some people get kind of ill in our company as well, sick, both in our field operations and in our factory. And, so we lost complete departments at times. And, we had to reorganize how people will work so when they came back, we could be safe.
I think for Turner, it was like a resiliency rethink overnight, right? Are our buildings going to continue to be built? Are we deemed essential? How do we work remotely and continue to service all of the needs of our projects and our clients? And it was an exercise in resiliency, the embracing of the technology like we're on right now. This was foreign to most of us pre-COVID. And we learned we can actually, for procurement, have a scope review and almost look people eye to eye, but through our computers. And it's not as good as face-to-face, but really the transformation and realizing the capabilities that we have to keep functioning in a different world was quite impressive.
For sure. So let's fast forward to today, right? In the past 2 to 3 months. So we know, I was looking at the stats this morning. Unemployment is back to, well, it's getting closer to what it was pre-pandemic. It's at about 6%. Pre-pandemic, it was at about 3.5%. Occupancy, at least in New York, is still not there. It's hovering at about 20%. Although here at 375 Hudson, we're probably at about 80. But what are all of you seeing now? What's going on today?
And we're still seeing supplier struggle. We're still seeing supply chain issues. And we also see doing a lot of planning right now, trying to plan for, how resilient you can be, trying to plan about, what your resistance capacity is to any unforeseen issues. That was one of the things, like we had a supplier that an entire production line everybody got COVID almost at the same time. That's something a year ago you would have never planned. Like, okay, what happens if everybody gets sick at once? So we're starting to see it's becoming a normal way of doing business. I think people are getting used to it. But the amount of planning that we put into projects and everything now will be forever changed. But we are seeing lead times still be long. I know lead times, from what I just read recently, are the longest I think they've been since like 1993. Still having issues with getting work staff, worker absentee can still be an issue. Transporting products, especially from overseas, is also an issue. So, and I cannot see the end in sight. Maybe for another few months. I'm hoping I'm wrong, but it's everybody that I've talked to, every economic indicator you look at. I mean, it's fourth quarter of 2021 is when I'm hoping we come out of this.
I mean, I would say that the supply chain right now is seemingly much more challenging than it was during the peak points of COVID. At that point, we were being impacted by COVID and only COVID. And right now it's so much more than that, right? As everybody worked their way out of COVID, yes, COVID is still there, but the pent up demand in residential, people exiting the cities and the work that they're doing on their homes, affects the commercial business in a big way. Drywall, roofing, insulation. And oh, by the way, you need gypsum for spray on fireproofing, so that impacts us. You look at all the different things. You look at the Texas winter storms. We've seen natural disasters before, but we've never seen them at the same time as we're coming out of a pandemic. We've seen pent up demand, but never seen that impacted with a pandemic and natural disasters. So it seems to be coming at you from all angles, right? The impacts of the Texas winter storms, we heard that it hit the chemical industry. It's not so much our manufacturers that seem to be having the impact. It's their suppliers right now. And we don't have that kind of visibility 3, 4, 5 steps down the supply chain. So I think there's a lot going on there. The Texas winter storms, it's PVC, it's foam for your furniture, it's paints and pigments. I just heard this morning that, believe it or not, the temporary toilet industry can't get enough plastic to make their temporary toilets. Well, think about it. That's a problem if our projects don't have, right? You can't have a project without a sufficiency of temporary toilets. It's
Well, you wouldn't want one for sure.
Right. It's kind of important. We saw that even during the pandemic, where the first thing that slowed down our projects was, believe it or not, toilet paper, because if you don't have a clean porta-john, you can't have your workers on site. And before the supply chain even hit, it was the toilet paper of all things that brought the industry to its knees. So you're kind of getting it from all sides.
Yeah, I would echo that. I mean, we use a fair amount of Sherwin-Williams products, and the trouble in Texas actually extended into Louisiana, and there's a lot of the polymers and pigments come from suppliers there, and so Sherwin-Williams was having a lot of struggles just to get the right chemicals to make their products, and so they started reformulating things with different products, and then you're kind of pushed into a situation where we're not quite sure of. I mean, they're telling us this will work, but has it been proven? And then you start, spraying this by the tens of thousands of feet, you have some liability there. But they were trying to think out of the box and keep things moving, and they had to kind of change up the chemistry on things. I mean, for us, lumber has been, through the roof, and a lot of our raw boards that we use to manufacture, case goods and panels, the slate, that's a byproduct of the wood tails from the wood framing industry, from solid lumber used in wood framing. So typically that's something that was sort of driven over the edge. And it's a lot of it's about availability. I mean, it even goes in, we bring in panels forward from Russia. There's the same problem there. And then the transportation factor, both domestically but internationally. I mean, you had complete ports in China that were sick and the containers piled up and you can't get containers. So, you're looking at a 20, 30 or more % increase, even if you can get the container to come. And, and how the ships were, not unloaded and couldn't get loaded and where the ships were, it really led to a lot of instability and virtually no guarantees or scheduling that could be held to for when you're going to receive your shipment. So there was a lot, and there still is these ripples for us. We still see them. It seems that lumber futures has gone down, but we're still seeing the elevated price.
And I want to touch on something that Drew, you just said, and that Bob said as well. First of all, lumber, it affects us in ways that we still don't even realize. I was talking to one of our curtain wall suppliers, and they said, "What do you think we crate your curtain wall in when we deliver it to your site?" So, and I wasn't even thinking that they were affected by lumber. You mentioned trucks, right? You can't get enough truckers. There's not enough truckers, containers. The ports are full. We still have ships sitting out at sea for 3 weeks waiting to come into the ports, because when they come in, there's no place to unload them. We heard on a recent call with one of our manufacturers that, what else stopped during COVID? Truck driving school, right? So you got people who have trucks that are just sitting there empty, and yet all the truck drivers during COVID who needed jobs and needed to take care of their families. So they went to work for Amazon or wherever, and they realized they can pay their bills and be home with their families at night and not go over the road for the week. So now companies are trying to hire them back. So they're offering them raises, right? So the costs are going up considerably. And we're seeing even that can backfire, where they offer them raises, they come back, but realize that they can now work less hours for the same amount of money. So, it's interesting what's going on. And Bob had mentioned timing. I think from some industries, boy, we really hope that it stabilizes by the end of the year. But, we're hearing first quarter, second quarter, 2022. We're hearing that the supply chain itself might stabilize. We're not hearing anybody talk about prices coming down.
I don't know
they don't come down.
I don't know what your customers' reaction are to the increased prices, but I don't know if it's a good thing, but most customers don't act surprised. They're not happy about it, but it just seems, whether you're buying, everybody uses the plywood as an example, right? Or a car, but it's hitting you at every point of your life. So most customers, they're not exactly happy, but they're not exactly surprised when, you're getting hit with price increases just continually from all vendors.
Well, we've seen, until about May, our subcontractors and suppliers seem to be absorbing the price increases. They wanted to build their backlogs. You guys can tell me if this is from your perspective as well.
Of course.
But building their backlogs, they kind of ate into their overhead and profit a little bit. We got to about May 1st, and for the first time, we started seeing prices pop, right? We're starting to see our estimates. We weren't hitting our numbers, and clients are definitely starting to see price increases. But remembering, of course, that all pricing is a three-legged stool. There's the cost of material, there's the cost of labor, and there's overhead and profit. So everybody's still making some business decisions on how much risk they can take. Are they able to lock in lump sum pricing? Are they looking to share some of that risk with the client? You can have it one way or the other. Either the client takes the risk or the trade partners take the risk, right? So, we're seeing kind of a lot of different directions that this risk management seems to be going.
And one of the things that we saw too was, it sort of happens on each economic upheaval, is that a lot of talent leaves our industry, and it's the labor. I think prior to this was stretched, and it was very difficult to get qualified people. I just think that's now it's worse. It seems to be harder. You have certainly on the low end labor, because of the incentives unemployment benefits. People have, decided, look, it's just more economically better. I just stay home, But on the upside too, you have people that have just said, look, I'm not going back to New York, and or I'm switching my situation, and then they leave our industry, and to get somebody to fill in that void, it takes a long time to get the talent, and the time it takes to really develop the craft to be able to, fill the shoes that are gone.
So Drew, are you seeing that like in your professional staff and equally in your labor pool, or are you seeing one more than the other?
We've been struggling with this for a while because our work has become more and more technology driven. So to have somebody that understands the technology plus the craft, it's just a very difficult skill set to get developed. So we spend a lot of time and money on that. But we have other guys that are older. They've been with us a long time, and they're starting to age out. And events like this have them age out faster. And I think that's our issue.
Going back to what Mike was talking about with the trade pricing, and for Bob and Drew, what have you guys seen? How are you approaching, when you're seeing the RFPs come in from Turner? Like how are you dealing with that three-legged stool that Mike's talking about? How's it changed, and how does it continue?
Communication is big. I mean, you try to be as open, being open with your customers, being honest, because everybody's facing it. It seems to be the best avenue for us. And like I said, people aren't always happy, but communicating it to them and trying to predict when it might level off, or when it's a better time to do one project or another. I think right now for the next 6 months, it's one of the best things you could possibly do is just have like an A team for planning everything out. If you do everything, safe, plan it out, you'll avoid a little bit of the chaos, but it's hard overall.
I mean, our volume is down. We've just seen the numbers, plummet, and so we really haven't been successful. And so our overall sales volumes are down considerably. They were down in 19 by 2/3, or of 20, 2/3 of 19, and we're down about 1/3 of 19 still. But our attitude is there's really no sense taking work you're going to lose money on. So
Right. For sure. And the other thing that we were talking about was labor, right? So Mike, we produce these reports, right? Every month we kind of, you can kind of fill in the details of it, but just looking at it from month to month, reading this month's resiliency report, it seemed like labor was like the kind of headline there, right? Just, productivity, shift work at the factories. Like it's not about, yes, the supply chain and raw materials for sure, but labor seemed to be more.
Right, for sure. I mean, some of it is demand related, right? They just trying to produce enough to meet the requirements, right? Right now, joists, very, very long lead time depending on the size and the quantity. And we know that the steel manufacturers are introducing new joist lines to try to keep up, but those things take a while, right? So, and they need labor. The truck drivers, that's about labor, right? There are trucks that are just sitting there collecting dust because there's no drivers for them. So that's about labor. And even on our projects, you mentioned earlier that labor is starting to feel as scarce as it did pre-COVID. And we're seeing that people are leaving the industry. We know the industry labor has been aging for an awful long time, trying to get people back. Some people left the industry because of COVID, don't want to come back. There are still some people, who are thinking their unemployment benefits are better. Hopefully that can work its way out at some point. I know you drive around town and all I see is help wanted signs. So,
everywhere, restaurants. I mean, it's the help wanted signs are in every industry. I mean, in town, in Manhattan, where I live, they're just everywhere.
And then you've even got, companies that furloughed employees that now we're trying to get them back, right? I mean, it's not our industry, but it affects us. American Airlines, right? They're canceling flights because they were one of the airlines that furloughed their employees instead of keeping them and finding a way to pay them with federal subsidies or whatever. So they're being hurt because they think it could take a year to get their labor back. I'd wager to say our industry is feeling some of that same pain, right? People found other things. They're not ready to come back, or they don't want to come back.
Have you seen a resistance to people not wanting to come back to the office to stay permanently remote?
It's an ongoing discussion for sure. Turner's been very outward with our staff, that we're following CDC guidelines. We're not requiring anyone to do anything they're not comfortable with. At the same time, we are working very hard to create a safe environment in our offices. We do believe we work more efficiently when we can see each other. So we're working our way to it, right? We know that there are other companies out there in the news that are mandating people come back to their office. We would like everyone to come back, but we want them to come back safely and be comfortable.
I think it's also heavily dependent on the type of work that you do, right? Even within our own industry, our job as construction managers, we're highly collaborative, right? Like I can't build a building by myself, right? But I think, in talking to kind of our partners in our relationships, we were talking to a lot of architects. They're not back, right? And they're not foreseeing to be back at full capacity, and a lot of them weren't pre-COVID either. So I think a lot of it is based on the type of work that gets executed, right? And kind of, but I think there's also that whole mentorship piece, right? The training and the mentorship piece, I think, is the universal gap that I think everyone will start to experience, just a matter of to what extent. But kind of, so shifting gears a little bit to recovery and lessons learned and all of this. There's been the New York Times wrote an article about a month ago, kind of looking back at the just in time, Toyota model that I thought it was actually younger than it was, but it said it was at the end of World War II, right? How did what's to be learned from there, right? It feels like there was a little bit of an over reliance on just in time. What are each of you thinking about as you think about resiliency and kind of how to get out of that mindset that I think for all of us is deeply ingrained in our professional lives, at least?
May I start on this one?
Go for it.
Because boy, that's a hot topic for us. So first of all, I'm no smarter than anybody else, and by April of 2020, I knew that COVID would be a multi-decade setback for lean manufacturing. Those empty shelves didn't feel so good. You ran out of everything, and intuitively, you were going to start to see increases in distribution centers and warehouses as people started to recognize that just in time, it's imaginary, right? It's not real. It's 100% dependent on a flawless supply chain. To be honest, that's not very well thought out. Even Toyota, the inventor of lean manufacturing, now wants a 4-month inventory of everything. What does that tell you, right? We want things on our shelves. There's got to be a happy medium between nothing and too much, right? So I think the industry is going to start to find that. I think that is also putting more demand on our supply chain right now because people are trying to fill up those shelves and fill up those new warehouses. I think we'll be better for it because I don't imagine that people are going to be as reliant on a flawless supply chain. It kind of, in hindsight, you really could have seen this coming, right? You really could have, maybe not to this extent, but you really could have seen it coming.
I think for us, I mean, for lessons learned, I think what we did, like Mike hit on, as far as, you have your 5 vendors deep and you don't know how to have that or control over that. What we try to do is we try to start producing a lot more of our own products, our enclosures. We increased the factory production, and then we also started to try to do as much work off premise, test all our systems at the factory, and just try to control so that the quality controls on the products we're building, we actually control that. So we control the resiliency, we control the QCs, we control the disaster planning. So we're taking a lot more of that in-house so that we can ensure that any good plan you put together, you're in control of it.
What about you, Drew? Do you think it's just more storage? Is it more real estate? Like, is there other things you can do to
I think it's look, from our suppliers. I mean, one of our machine companies, they're the probably largest machine company in our industry. They were getting pre-COVID. There was such a demand for equipment. They were getting parts in from their suppliers, motors unpainted. I mean, just because people could not, sub factories couldn't keep up with it. In America, I mean, the genre has been outsourcing, right? I mean, it's just let's find the cheapest labor we can, and people like those prices, so that's what happens. But when you've outsourced, safety equipment to, if you're 3M and your plant's in China, and China says, guess what? We're not shipping your stuff, even though you own the plant. We're not shipping it from China. We're keeping it here. America's not getting those products, So, how does this affect us from in a situation from a security perspective and from having control over our own economy going forward? I don't know how that. I would say that tariffs didn't seem to bode well for the steel and metal industries that they were trying to protect. But at the same time, I think America's not going to be satisfied as a country that doesn't make anything anymore. And that's it remains to be seen what's happened, because I mean, at the end of the day, I mean, I show up at your door. If my price is more than the next guy, I'm not going to get the job. I mean, that's just the market we live in, right? So I can say, look, I'm making it here in America. You got better, control over the kinetic nature of the construction project. I can respond. I can, when I'm millions more, and it buys a lot of aspirin to the owner. He says, I'm gonna get it from Vietnam or whatever. So that's, that's been a pressure on us for a long time. And it really started with NAFTA, and you started to see a lot of big architectural houses fall, hanging back, or, because there were just, product was coming in initially from Canada, but that started a race to the bottom that became global, and, so, we import stuff. We have to, how that changes, I guess, is remains to be seen. I think Americans have short-term memory, and I think this will pass, and I think we'll go back to old habits and till the next crisis, when we really can satisfy the national demand for whatever they need.
I think I worry about people going back to those habits, but I do think people are more likely to have more inventory than they've had before. I do think that's probably, hopefully, a long-term change. But we've selectively seen some companies who recognized what happened during the supply chain, and even if they're still manufacturing in other countries, they're trying to be a little more resilient in manufacturing their product in more than one place. So at least if something happens in one country, there's another country that can still produce it, as opposed to everything's only made in one place and then something happens in that one place and you've got a problem. So we haven't seen a lot of that, but we've seen some of it. We think that's interesting. We think the resiliency is one of those words of the future that companies need to figure out how to be resilient. How do you keep going? I think we all proved we were resilient through COVID, but how are we going to evolve from that? Because, I don't think any of us are naive. This could happen again. It could happen again next year or the year after. And even if it doesn't, shouldn't we be prepared for it?
I think what Drew, sorry,
Nell.
Bob. I think what Drew said was right on, though, right? Because I think of myself and kind of my spending behaviors. I think Americans, myself included, like things fast and they like things cheap, right? And there's a very short-term memory loss. And then when I was buying masks a year ago, yes, it mattered to me where they came from. Does it matter to me today? Not so much, right? And it's the same. Even think of like my Amazon purchases, right? I'm used to having something tomorrow or in 2 days, right? And if it's a decent enough price, then yeah, I'll pay for it. Right. So I think that's very concerning, right? Because I would hope I know better, but yet I still, you still kind of find yourself falling into these patterns and behaviors.
I think, some of these things have been trends that have been interesting. I mean, from just commercial industrial real estate in our area of New Jersey, that market was pretty much wiped out in Brooklyn and Queens, because it got in a lot of those buildings were turned into residential properties. And then what happened is this last mile demand for people, same day delivery. The prices on just flat yard space to store fleets of trucks and and warehousing, last mile type warehousing. I mean, I remember when we would pay a couple dollars a square foot for industrial space. I mean, those numbers are reaching $20 a square foot. I mean, it's like the new corporate real estate. And then some cases you see there are assets of corporate buildings being taken down. We're also, and they're putting up warehousing in industrial space because it's a lot more lucrative, you know? So, you know, it's how people want to conduct business. You know, the unintended consequences of this is, you know, that it's the decline of the retail space. And, you know, will everybody be happy when that's sort of not as available as it is today, you know? Because again, I mean, it's really what people want, you know? So those trends, I don't see that this really is going to have an effect stopping that, just from my vantage point, you know? And I think you try to do what you can do to be resilient, but you know, for us, you know, we really can't be involved in the, you know, mass kind of kitchen cabinet industry. A lot of these things that are sort of commoditized or something, we have to do something that's, you know, custom, that's really time sensitive and unique. That's the markets we can play in. So it's sort of tough to us to have a lot of different material backed up. You know, we have solid suppliers, but because of the pressure on us for schedule, you know, even before this, we didn't really gypsy it around to suppliers. You know, we didn't, you know, we got to try to shop our numbers, but we only deal with a few people in each category. So we have some buying capacity and preference. You know, I remember times when different things were on allocation, drywall, I mean, and certainly panel products. And, you know, the industry has these, you know, fits and starts. And when it's hot, it gets very hot. And, you know, you got to make sure that you have suppliers that are reliable. So that's kind of the way we've been always trying to manage it. But, you know, and our strategy has always been, you know, rather than outsource, we try to make it, we try to use technology. That's just been our philosophy. So, you know, but again, it's you know, times like this really kind of, it shows the holes in anybody's system, you know.
For sure. So I have some questions that are coming in. So I'm just going to kind of jump back and forth a little bit. So we had another question come in, talk about labor shortage, right? We were talking about people leaving the industry altogether, people leaving certain cities altogether. How do you come back from that? And how do you, is it with technology? You know, is there some other answer that you can kind of get there to figure out this labor shortage? And Drew, I know you're heavy into, I always joke and call you the Willy Wonka of wood. But what do you do there?
Well, labor is like, our source of technical labor has been a real struggle. And, you know, I've had problems for years, and we've been trying to find solutions to it, because, you know, if you're, you know, I've said it before, I'm prejudiced against millennials. I hate all millennials. They're nice people. I still don't like them. And the problem is, you can't, like they say, you have to understand, you have to build a business that you can have, you know, workers be transient and move every 3 to 5 years. I can't, because you won't even have mastery of what we do in that period of time. It takes longer. And, you know, it's a struggle too, because I think that the educational system, though America has led the way, I believe at this point it's not worth the cost of capital in many circumstances, and kids come out with degrees in debt. And I start at the bottom. I start at the very bottom again. I mean, we have kids from young people that have graduated with degree engineers. They don't understand plan, elevation, section. I mean, this is the level that I'm starting at. So why am I paying you for this college? It doesn't help you. It doesn't help me. I mean, we set up our own apprenticeship program where we put young people through school. We hire them right out of high school, and you know, we pay for them to go to school a couple days a week, and they work as apprentice here, and they work their way up, and you know, they don't have any debt. They've been getting paid and have our benefits. And we're trying to find a way that we change the paradigm of this lack of sort of loyalty to the employer, right? So that I feel like I can just go at any time, and also try to change the cost model of this, because it's not an efficient way to use the capital to educate somebody the way we do it now. And I think you have seen some traction to this. I mean, our business is very based in Central European, you know, Germany, Austria, Northern Italy. Like, that's where the hub of architectural woodwork is. And so that apprenticeship model that has served Germany well for so many years. I mean, they're a manufacturing country, right? But they're surrounded by cheap labor. How do they do that, right? It's almost, Americans would think it's not possible. but they double down on technical education for kids that are interested in it. And kids are exposed to job careers at the junior high level, so by the time they're into high school, they're already starting to separate and get kids excited about what they want to do. We get engineers out of college and like, why did you become an engineer? And I was good in math, so they said become an engineer. Like, but they don't know what an engineer does, and I think that's a big piece that's missing. I mean, academics can't be completely conceptual. It has to have some basis in the real world application of what they're teaching. And I just see that as a lot of places have been lost. So we've tried to develop our pipeline of talent, in the way that we're doing it. And it's tough. It's not that I have figured out the Holy Grail how to do this. I mean, we have kids come and they don't make it through, and it's a process. And, at the high school level, they're still kind of immature and they don't have a lot of good perspective. So you have to do a lot of mentoring and help to try to get people through as best you can. It's a struggle. I mean, it's always, talent has been a struggle. And I think construction is in an industry that people perceive to be as not a good career to go into. It's like manufacturing. It's dark, it's dirty, it's dangerous. There's no upside to this. It's dying. It's interesting because we hired a young guy and he came from a part of Jersey City, and he kind of tough, a little bit of knocked around as a kid. And so he came to us and we were interviewing him. And one of the things that we look for is, what are kids doing around gaming and their, I guess that we're trying to understand their technical interest and their use of technology and how creative they're on those realms. And this guy had created some games and some animations and stuff. And then he started to talk about how in his school they put together sort of a quasi-court system. If there's a behavioral issue, the kids could elect to go into this sort of student body where they kind of have it's not like a court system, but then ultimately they go do public service work. And then like this young guy, he said, I did it with them. We all did it together, And so, I said to him, like, well, what are you going to do if, you're not successful with us here in this program? What would be your next step? And I'm thinking, he'd go to community college, maybe pre-law, something like that. And I'm going to become a plumber. And I started laughing. I said, why would you become a plumber? He says, today, all my friends that get out of college, everybody has a college degree and they don't have a job. He says, not a lot of plumbers. He says, and you can make a lot of money as a plumber. He says, I like making things. Why not be a plumber? He said, I thought about a carpenter, but they got to be up on high things. I don't really like that. I mean, plumbers, and he had thought it all out. He's like, I'm going to be a plumber, And I just thought it was an interesting observation from a young person that you would think wasn't that ability to have sort of seen that from the circumstances that he kind of grew up in. But it's an interesting perspective. And I wonder if now more young people aren't going to, change their minds. I do think that young people starting to have more an emphasis on craft and on making things and on, opportunities that like kind of lie in that genre as opposed to, I got to go to college, And I think our industry is woefully lacking. I mean, when young people get out of school and they have this, education, but, architecture and sometimes engineering, it's not really based on the realities of what we do. And when they don't have that practical, time on site, and then they come on and they have a sense that they can dictate the direction to older guys they perceive to be not as, capable because they're carrying tools. When those guys have a tremendous amount of knowledge and information, and when there's a resistance for them to understand and talk to them and learn from them, and they make decisions that are contrary to a productive situation, it becomes very costly and very frustrating, and that's part of what I think that I see as a big struggle going forward is how do you take the workforce of tomorrow and really get them to be productive? I mean, it's a challenge that I see.
Agreed. Bob, what about you? What about technicians and your factory employees and all that? What are you seeing there?
For us, I mean, I even think as an industry, we were having a hard time getting younger people to get interested in our industry even before COVID. We were having problems finding people, and COVID did not help that whatsoever. Technicians will approach a lot of the technical schools, try to get them. But I do think as an industry, we have to work together to raise awareness. One of the organizations I'm involved with, 7x24, is we'll do a university challenge to make kids in colleges aware of the data center industry. Because that is, another thing with jobs is you got to look at which jobs are going to be replaced. I mean, it just seems like every year another job becomes antiquated and replaced. by Amazon, by technology. So that's the other thing. I think if you could raise awareness that technicians, carpenters, plumbers, I don't see how those types of jobs will be replaced in the next, 10 or 15 years, which is a safe career path to go into. And I've actually talked to some of even my competitors about working together to try to raise awareness in our industry, to bring more people in, show them. I mean, our technicians, it's not a bad living at all. I mean, it's long hours and you get your hands dirty, but it's a career. It's a very good career, very good benefits. So I think as an industry, we have to work together. I know Turner's heavily involved with the ACE Mentor program, if I remember correctly. It's stuff like that. I think as an industry, we would be good to work together to try to raise more awareness.
I think also to some extent, prefab and modularization. We can bring the labor from the job site where there is no labor to the place where the labor exists, right? Things can be built in remote cities and states away and put on trucks. So to some extent, getting as much of the labor to where the labor exists, where it can be built in climate controlled facilities. It's safer, you're building on the ground instead of up in the air. That can be a benefit as well. Frankly, the marketplace there is still, in my view, embryonic. If you thought you needed 3 bids, finding 3 companies that can do that, it can be a challenge. It's also a decision that needs to be made very early in the design process. You can't finish your drawings and then decide to modularize something. You have to make that decision early on, find the companies that can do it, and then design it around whatever system they're proposing, because they're not all proposing the same thing. But I do think there's benefits there to taking advantage of where the labor is when it's not necessarily in the cities where we're building our buildings.
Yeah, Mike, that's something I hit on earlier. That's exactly what we started to do. Like I say, we're starting to do more of the work at our factory between the products we build, enclosures, testing. We try to tape it where we have a good labor pool that's reliable.
Yeah, I think that's a huge untapped opportunity. I mean, one of the things that I think that some degree that industry still tries to go into a warehouse and build conventionally as you would build if you were on site. And so sometimes the costs don't always bear out to do it that way. But I think you have to look at the process and change the way you build. I mean, when I started, we used to machine parts, assemble them, sand them, and then finish them. Now what we'll do is we'll finish flat panels, then machine them and assemble them. So, the actual path has changed so you can automate them. There's no robot that's going to come and hang sheetrock, but if you can mechanize the process that changes how sheetrock is applied and the way something's built, that's ultimately where you can find value and really work to automate things. And the technology is really here. I mean, over the last 15 years, we've really seen it where you can take the actual imperfections of a building and model it accurately enough. And that's our business. We model something and we make the millwork basically with robots, with technology, and then bring it out in as big a piece as we can get to the job site. I mean, I tell my people all the time, I mean, I hate being on a job site. All my insurance issues come from there. It's really the big risk as far as labor, time. And so, I really won't be happy until we don't even, we can just make everything, put it on a truck. We don't have to stop. We're going to push it out the back and then we'll keep driving. And that's when we've arrived. But I think there's a tremendous amount of opportunity to really, prefab out and bring stuff out and minimize risk, increase the speed to completion and quality control,
And there's a different labor pool there too, as well, right? You've got people with young children who want to work, would not be willing to drive into the city to work in our buildings, but might be willing to go down the street to the factory, knowing that they're working, 8 to 3 every single day and could still be home when their children or do whatever they need to do with their children. That can be a largely untapped labor pool that's just not available to us.
Yeah, I mean, I think also you work in, you could say you could be in our factory's air conditioned, and you're working in a ergonomically correct manner to get stuff accomplished. And now what we're seeing in our industry is where robots really used to sort of be autonomous and in cages and operations, and and so the risk of over automating an operation like Tesla's factory, where they really kind of went a bit too far and had to pull parts out. You still need people making products. You can automate things to a large degree, but now we're seeing how technologies come that actually allows workers to work with the robots, with the machines, so they can be right next to a machine that's operating, where a decade ago that really wouldn't have been possible. But that allows them to kind of do that human part of the process that's necessary and continue the production pace the machine would normally have. So that's changing in our world. And I think as more and more that develops, you'll see this integration of the two to come back together, where you're going to see greater productivity and greater ability to do like sort of really custom stuff with automation.
So going back to the prefab, we had a question come in about how the supply chain, at least in our industry, would impact modularization. Like how do you see those two kind of marrying each other, and the shift that would happen should the industry go towards a more modularized model?
I've always pitched first thing is cost control and quality control. It's been very, very well accepted by. I mean, we started this a few years ago, and we just keep increasing it. I mean, every year it's been very, very well received.
Yeah, I'm not seeing much conflict there. The supply chain, the availability of materials, one way or the other, that's going to work its way out. The materials, it's the same materials, whether they're going into modularization or coming to our job site. So I'm not seeing a lot of concern.
I mean, also in a union world, I mean, certainly in our market, I mean, and Nelly, you see this, we discussed this. I mean, it's just that the owners aren't really allowing that sort of regulation to be enforced anymore. So who can do what, when they can do it, like a lot of that's just dying, and I don't know that an owner's going to put up with. And if you can buy it from like a pre-wiring of the room from, say, Cooper's plant, where they bring out like a whole wiring harness and the whole their whole room, it's like just basically attached to the studs. I mean, like again, it's why would you go back to guys cutting MC cable and and all the extra material that's piled up, and do we need this or do we need that? And then at the end of the day, there's all this extra material you're throwing out and trying to get rid of, and I would think that it's a hard argument to fight against.
For sure. So going back to what Bob was talking about with communications, how do we effectively communicate this to our clients and our owners, right? How long, especially what worries me is like lump sum pricing, right? How long can we hold pricing? What do we do? How much do we share? How forthcoming are we? Because I feel like we have a lot of clients asking us what's going on, super interested in what it is. But we still haven't seen a slowdown in lump sum pricing either. So what do we do there? How do we communicate what's going on?
I mean, we should be transparent with our clients, right? Yeah. Would we love to buy something as a lump sum price from our trade partners? Absolutely. And then we could present to the client, here's the lump sum price for that product. If that trade partner is including significant monies in there for the risk that they see in the supply chain, we should understand what that is and communicate that to the owner. And maybe the owner wants to participate and take some of that risk. Maybe they want to price the material according to some index. And then when you're actually buying, adjust it, frankly, up or down, because we've seen it go both ways, right? But our recommendation internally and externally is to buy what we can buy, and what we can't buy to communicate to the client and figure out how we're going to manage the risk.
Yeah, and we have an issue too, because it's become an industry trend for people to pre-purchase equipment 18 to 24 months in advance. And we are being asked, part of the contract is, you have to hold your price, no price increases for that entire time, and the product hasn't even been produced. So we've been dealing with that where, we sign on a lower side, and then all of a sudden we're hitting in an increase size. So that's another issue that we contend with. But like Mike said, I think transparency, there's so much research, there's so much available information, all the price increases, all the materials, all the issues, it's very, very, very well publicized. So we've just been trying to be as transparent as we can and communicate it as early as possible.
I mean, if our trade partners take the risk and our client can afford it, great. If our trade partners won't take the risk, then we have to say to our client, how are we going to manage this?
Got it. All right, guys. So crystal ball time. Everyone wants to know pricing and lead time. What do we think? Short term, long term? It's being
Every-
recorded. So we can go back and either reward you
Everything that
or
I
give you all the thumbs down when it's wrong.
we get access all the time, and the most optimistic forecast I see, which I know Mike said it's going to go further, but the most optimistic is fourth quarter 2021. And we have some co-vendors that, larger manufacturers, publicly traded companies, we have a good relationship and talk with them, and they have the same outlook.
So Bob, that's pricing and lead time or one?
Lead time will not, pricing, I'm not 100% sure on if it will be that long. Lead time, absolutely, quarter this year.
Drew, what's your bet? What's your gut telling you?
You've always been expensive. You guys always tell me I'm expensive. I don't see any reason to change.
What's the difference, right?
You guys don't give as much work, so like, now what are you gonna do?
Nice.
Look, I mean, from a practical view, we all see prices go up and they rarely go down. When they go down, it's because something really bad happened, like a recession that we all hope doesn't happen, right? They dropped down a little bit in COVID. Do we think they're going to stabilize? Yes, we do. We don't have the crystal ball on when, like Bob said, maybe they're both, maybe pricing is stabilizing and the supply chain itself is stabilizing. In some markets, it'll probably be the end of this year, but in some places it will probably be first quarter or second quarter next year. I do believe they'll figure it out, right? The warehouses, the people who are now trying to have inventory are going to start to collect that inventory. At some point, they're going to start to satisfy the demand. Will the residential boom keep going? Who knows, right? So that could throw a wrench into the works. But I do think pricing will be stabilizing sooner than the supply chain itself stabilizing. That's my view.
I think I would echo that. I think the economy has started to pivot a lot quicker than most people thought, and in many circumstances. And I would think that there's going to be changes. I'm not convinced that the exodus from the city is going to continue. I think there was a shift for people to go there. I think that reasons they still wanted to move into an urban area for their services. I think that still exists. So I don't know. My sense is that's not going to be, and that'll slow and potentially change. I also think that to some degree, officing will change. It's going to change. I mean, I think maybe the days of benching are kind of over, but I think that there's going to be a need for office space, and as time goes by, to having people work together and collaborate is going to be, re-recognized. We'll see more uptick in that as well. That's just my feeling.
Great. Thanks, guys. So just kind of summarizing. So key takeaways, if you labor continues to be a challenge. Looks like we all have to kind of get to the high school level to get there. If you have some industrial space in the outer boroughs, you're about to be a millionaire. Drew's going to stay expensive, and we think towards the end of the year things will start to look better. I think I got it. All right. So with that, I want to thank all of our panelists for everything that you guys shared. It was a great discussion. I want to thank all of our attendees for continuing to tune in and check us out. So look out for us in July again. We're going to be talking about life science, that market, another hot market that's continuing to increase in the city. So with that, thanks everyone. Stay cool and be safe. Take care.
Take care, everybody.
Thank you.